appealing for people. But it depends on the person. So this is sort of that questionable category. There are some people that do really terrible with dairy. As for myself, I definitely have a sensitivity to dairy. So depending on what part of it, one of the major proteins in dairy is called casein. Some of you have probably heard of casein. I definitely have a sensitivity to casein. It's very sad. I've definitely grieved over it. But you know, for me it's very obvious. And when I was postpartum with my son Phineas, so I'd had him for 6 months after having given birth to my now almost 7-year-old son, I decided to do a science project, that's what I call them, where I did an elimination diet of dairy. I just took it out of my diet for 3 weeks. It was like in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, Hanukkah. We're a little bit of a mixed family. So in between the 2 holidays. And I said, okay, I'm going to do 3 weeks without dairy. And honestly, I really didn't feel much different. Or I should say I didn't acknowledge feeling much different. I really didn't want to feel much different. But it's when I reintroduced dairy into my diet that I realized, oh yeah, I felt a lot different. So I realized that pretty much every day of my life, I had severe lethargy in the afternoon. Like, severe. I would have lunch, right? And it was a relatively healthy lunch. I mean, I was gluten-free, and I was eating healthy, organic, natural foods with cheese. and healthy, like, you know, good quality cheese, right? And I would like practically be falling asleep on my clients. It was awful. Like the type of lethargy where it was like hard to breathe. It was like, oh, I am like super just spent. And hard to think and kind of foggy. And it affected me hormonally, it affected my menstrual cycle. And I also realized that it was like the first time in my life during those 3 weeks that I didn't have dull, chronic headaches. Who knew I had a headache all the time? I mean, all the time. I had like a dull headache by the afternoon. I was just like kind of foggy, just didn't want to be hanging out with clients and people, wanted to just go and kind of crawl into bed. So during those 3 weeks, I just didn't realize it, which is kind of funny. You know, you feel better and you don't really think that you weren't feeling good before. But it's when I reintroduced it, it was so obvious to me. I started immediately, got the dull headaches back, the lethargy back, and it was that much more apparent. So for me, it wasn't ideal. But, you know, fast forward a couple of years later, a few years later, I had my daughter, and none of my maternity clothes fit, because I had lost like 15 pounds in swelling from all the dairy that I had been eating. It was a much different pregnancy, too. I had a lot less morning sickness, and just in general, all kinds of things were different. Fast forward, we had a lot of stress in our lives for a particular period, and we had some illness in the family, and I was just having a hard time dealing. And I really needed to have some cheese. So I decided, you know what, cheese is good for me. And so I took a month, and I ate a lot of it. And let me tell you, it was really good cheese by the Whole Foods receipt at the end of the month. But I had a bunch of it. Literally, within like a few days of starting to eat it again, I got the dull headaches back, I got the lethargy back, and it's just stress. It's really not the cheese. And then a few weeks later, I had like an epiphany. I'm like, what am I doing? And I stopped the cheese. I'm like an addict here. And within a couple of days, all the headaches disappeared, all the lethargy disappeared. I mean, it was so obvious for me. But I will say that there are definitely people that do well on really, really good dairy. For sure, it's like a very good fat source. But if you're going to have dairy and you're certain that it's good for you, and I'll talk about how you can be certain, you want to make sure that it's optimal. Certainly not skim milk and 1% and 2%, and certainly not dairy that has growth hormones in it. The ideal best quality dairy is that that's raw, unpasteurized, unhomogenized, raw dairy, which is hard to find, right? But you can find it in cheese form. They can be like raw sheep's milk and cheese and things like that. And by the way, goat and sheep milk products do have casein in them, but they don't have lactose in them. So people that think they're lactose intolerant, they can oftentimes have goat and sheep products, right? But if you're sensitive to casein, then it's sort of all the cheese products. But the best way to know if you're dairy sensitive is to do an elimination diet, where you take a solid ideally 3 months, but that's hard to digest. So some people just do it for 4 weeks, 30 days, and they eliminate it entirely from their diet. And they don't eliminate anything else from what they were generally eating, because if you eliminate too many things at once, it gets very complicated to know why you're feeling better, right? So let's say you're already gluten-free, etc., and then you decide, okay, now I'm ready to see how does dairy affect me. And you have to go into it, not to say that that works for everyone, nor did it work for me the first time, but ideally you go into the elimination diet with the mindset of, I'm not invested in the outcome, which is hard because it's a really yummy food, right? But that's the best way to know, because otherwise, we can sort of, alter what we think in lots of ways, right? So you do 4 weeks, ideally longer, and you eliminate all dairy sources, so milk and butter and cheese. You can certainly have substitutes. There's plenty of substitutes out there. There's butter substitutes and milk substitutes. I mean, milk, you could find rice milk or hemp milk or coconut milk. Butter, there's Earth Balance, there's Smart Balance. There's all kinds of different substitutes. For baking, like a lot of the shortenings you could do, like the palm oil shortening, I think it's called Spectrum shortening. There's lots of substitutes. For cheese, the substitutes are not that tasty, but you could try. I have found some nut cheeses, but it's just not the same. It's sort of an entirely different type of food. So at any rate, you've eliminated completely. And then after that 1 to 3 month period, depending on how long you're able to do it, you slowly wean the food back in. I'm not saying go out and have a cheese pizza, right? But have a little bit of cheese, a little bit of milk, a little bit of butter, and see how you feel. But really try to catalog all the different things, not just your gut and your weight, but how you're thinking, and are you feeling any headaches or any joint pain, your level of congestion. Because dairy is definitely known to be mucus producing. So lots of people that have sinus issues and head congestion, dairy can be a big factor, right? So it's just learning about your body and how you react. So that's a very particular food. And you might be surprised. I mean, I do these science projects on my kids all the time, and they certainly don't appreciate it. The almost 7-year-old appreciates it much less than the younger one, who I think doesn't really know what she's eating, or I should say what she isn't eating. But with him, for example, he was very congested, like tons of, snot, as lots of kids have when they go to school at that age. And I took him off of dairy, and within a week, it was all gone. All gone. And then a month later, I said, all right, we'll try it again, because he kept nagging at me, Mommy, please. And within a day, all the snots were back. And then I did it a week later. We took him off, and all of it was gone. I was like, honey, are you seeing the pattern here? So, I mean, he wasn't happy about it, but he got it. At that age, at least he's cognitive enough to say, okay, Mommy, fine. Let's find some good stuff to substitute. So dairy is an individual thing, but if you are going to eat dairy and you're pretty certain that it's good for you, then make sure it's really optimal dairy.